Okay, that's the neoliberalism aspect. And at a stroke of a pen, this next Conservative government, Theresa May's, if she is, did I say the next? God, that's pessimistic. If Theresa May wins the next election, the Minister of Education could sign a document making all academies into separate, independent of the state schools, private schools, which could, if they wanted, charge fees. So who can't afford to pay the fees? Class-based education. Right, now the final, I think it's the final bit, yeah, the final, the final couple of slides about the education context for critical education is about neoconservatism. Because as I've said 3 or 4 times, neoliberalism does not come alone. It has a twin called neoconservatism. Actually, in discussions over the next couple of days, there's some interesting tensions between neoliberalism and neoconservatism, but I won't talk about that at the minute. So what's happened? When the first national curriculum in England came into force in England, as a result of the 1988 Thatcher Education Reform Act, Margaret Thatcher herself made decisions about the curriculum. Herself. And again, when we have discussion, I can explain that, but these are, I used to say to I was a teacher educator. I used to teach training teachers for about 40 years, long time. And I used to say to them, look out the window. Can you see a curriculum coming down from the sky? Can you see a curriculum delivered from the planet Zog? But it doesn't come from outer space. It comes from Adolf Hitler, or Benito Mussolini, or Joseph Stalin, or Margaret Thatcher. Absolute control. And to make sure, one of these says, I don't know if it's on this page or the next page, one of these says the control of pedagogy. The English government even now controls how you teach. Controls the pedagogy. I talked a bit about religion, I talked about so control of pedagogy. Students are controlled. There are still some universities, if you want to work at or become active in an English university, there are still some where there are still student demonstrations against privatisation, blah, 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 blah. But not many, because most students are saying, I am a customer. I am paying £27,000 for this course. Okay. I missed that, sorry. Right, okay. So, part 2. Shall we take a little break? I mean a psychological break. I want to drink some. Then, how long have I been talking for? Right.
It's 50 minutes.
I've been talking for
45 minutes.
Okay, so the final part, critical education. But another 20 seconds. Help yourself with water. Vitamins. Okay, it's warm in here. You know this has got an audience, live stream. There's millions in China watching this show. You never know. I've turned up to make speeches, well-advertised speeches. I turned up to make a big speech once. And the audience was 2 people, both of whom knew far more about what the subject was than I did. So we had an interesting discussion. Okay. Right, so now this is the second half. This is where Arsenal loses, for those of you who follow football. Right. Okay, let's have a look. Yeah. So, what are the bases, plural, what are the bases of critical education? For me, they are the 3 A's. 1, 2, 3. Anger, analysis, activism. Society. Big debate, I know, we can talk about it for hours, if you want. But the classic is that anyone who sells their labour power, I do, Lotto does, a hospital porter does, a manager does. But I'm angry at the fact that members of my family and my class are poor, suffer lives of deprivation, suffer lives of humiliation. I'm going to recommend what a film. It's by Ken Loach, who is the best, in my view, the best filmmaker in Britain. He's a Marxist. And the film is I, Daniel Blake. It is heartbreaking. It is the story of a man, a carpenter, worked all his life, decent man. He has a little heart attack. Can't work. So he goes to what's called the DWP, the Department for Work and Pensions, where you have to go and ask for money. And it is a deliberate exercise in humiliation, a deliberate exercise in suppression. If you turn up to one of the meetings 5 minutes late, you will be sanctioned. That means they will take away your money. You will have no money at all for 2 or 4 or 6 or 10 or 12 weeks. Deliberate humiliation. And there's been a lot of... I have comrades in the civil service unions who work in these places. It's well known. And the film I, Daniel Blake is the story of this.
Which year is it?
Huh?
Which year?
Well, it came out last year, I think.
Last year?
It's very new. Very new. Yeah. It's Britain today. Britain today. Okay, so you may have guessed, but I'm not an anarchist. So the anger, although I work with anarcho-syndicalists on demonstrations, but not with the Black Bloc, which is, yeah. Okay, so the analysis, we all make our own analyses. And the analysis that I come to from my lifetime of experience, my lifetime of activism, my lifetime of reading, is a Marxist analysis. It's not a liberal analysis, it's not a conservative analysis, it's not a fascist analysis, certainly not a postmodern analysis. So I analyse capitalist society. But then, this one does not, you might have noticed, does not begin with A. There are 3 A's plus this one. And in political philosophy and in the work of Freire, in the work of Gramsci, in the work of critical pedagogy, in the work of radical educators, we have to have hope. We have to have utopias. We have to have visions of a different past. visions of a different present, visions of a different future. So we have to have the dreams. I was talking to Lothar over lunch, and the phrase, and I think it's on one of the slides coming up, some of you, do you all look at Antonio Gramsci? The work of Gramsci? There's a wonderful phrase he has. He says that as activists, because he was a Marxist, an activist, his phrase was, do you know this? Pessimism of the intellect, optimism of the will. Very famous phrase. Pessimism of the intellect. So we look at what's happening and it's terrible. But optimism of the will. But we can do something. Okay, so this is my particular utopia, which is egalitarian. It is not merit, it is not this one. So I don't know why I put that one there for, because they're different. Egalitarianism as against equal opportunities, they're very different. Equal opportunities can be equal opportunities to climb to very unequal society. That's the difference with meritocracy and egalitarianism. Meritocracy, again, huge debates in the education psychology and sociology literature. Meritocracy does not seek to change the nature of society and exploitation. It seeks to minimise oppression and discrimination. But it doesn't seek to change the exploitative nature of, if I can use Marxist terminology, the capital-labour relation, the capitalist nature of society based on the exploitation of labour power. Right. Oh, there it is. That's the next one. Yeah. Of course, many people are going to say, so let's, I'm doing all right. Do you know the English phrase, I'm all right, Jack? I'm all right, Jack means, hey, there's problems, I'm doing fine. That's I'm all right, Jack. So, stasis, things stay the same. Quiescence, or even increasing inequality. Not only am I doing all right, hey, these new laws mean I can pay my workers less. I get more money in my pocket. So there's very different visions of utopia, of course. I was sitting on a plane once, going to New York. I've never told you this. Never told you this story. A new one. I was sitting on a plane, going to New York, and I was reading. I had my PowerPoint, I was working on the PowerPoint. Marx this, Marx that, equality this, equality that. And the guy next to me said, hey, you want to read this? And it's a book by somebody called Ayn Rand. Have you heard of A-Y-N R-A-N-D? Ayn Rand. Well, again, for those who look at political philosophy, if you look at the political philosophy of Hayek, you know Hayek? H-A-Y-E-K. Hayek. I mean, their philosophy, Ayn Rand, and I call them economic Nazis. I don't think anybody else calls them that, but for me they're economic Nazis. They say inequality is good. You must have inequality, and you must not give charity. You must not even give charity. People must live or die according to how well they can do. And if you are weak, die. That for me, and Hayek had a slightly a similar take, and Hayek actually was Margaret Thatcher's favourite philosopher. On the, I think the Institute for Economic Affairs, which was one of the two major think tanks, there was a big picture of Hayek where he was talking about about the need for inequality and how we must not pity those who fall by the wayside. Right.
He came up with the word neoliberalism.
Sorry, say that again.
He invented this word neoliberalism. He was the first.
Oh, was he?
Yeah.
Right, okay. And of course, the first manifestation of neoliberalism was not Reagan and Thatcher. The first manifestation of neoliberalism was not England and the USA, although they were the most powerful protagonists. It was Chile.
Pinochet.
It was the Pinochet overthrow on 9/11, the same date as the Twin Towers, but in 1974 or something, when the fascist government of Augusto Pinochet overthrew the democratically elected Salvador Allende government and carried out the absolutely brutal neoliberalisation of education, of society, with mass murder as well, murder of trade unionists and socialists. Right. Here is the third A: anger, analysis, with hope, and activism. I don't know how strong you are. I don't know how strong I am. I'm not saying I don't know my own strength. I'm not saying that. But I'm saying we do what we can. I don't criticise those who say, look, I'm not in a position to come on demonstrations, or I'm not in a position to help write these leaflets. We have lives, we have children, we have families, we have other commitments. Having said that, I think we are failing if we do not play an activist role. It is not enough to sit in our armchairs and swear at the television. So activism, and for me, and this is where you may be different. You may be very different from me. And there's a lovely, huge debate about social movements, social movement organisation, party organisation, spontaneity. I'm not a spontaneist. I think we need organisation. I think we need programme. And I think the failings, and again, we may talk about this more in the next 2 days. It's very interesting what happened to the Arab Spring, what happened to etc., that they failed. They had no coherent organisation. They had no programme apart from getting rid of the dictator. So this is what motivates me. This is the core of my belief. To backtrack it, because I've just given you my views, there are different views. Of course there are. Of course there are. What's education for? What should it be for? One is an empirical question. What does it do? An empirical analytical question. What does it do? The other one is a normative, moral, ethical question. What should it do? And of course we get fascists. It is for the glory, education should be for the glorification of the nation and the leader. And what a pity if you are not part of that homogeneous ethnic group, then you die. Or is it to get jobs? The neoliberal version is homo economicus, where there is only one God, and that God is named Mammon. God is named money. And again, if we want, we could talk about capitalism and the essential nature of profit, and competition in capitalist society. Or is it the next one? To become educated, to fit into your place, into the labour market, without making a fuss. Without making a fuss. To repeat the phrase, there is no alternative. So you go, you leave school, you leave university, you get drunk on Friday nights, you have sex on Sunday morning, you go to the football on Saturday afternoon. Just be a good worker. Whatever you do, don't question. If you do, hey, you may not get promoted. Then there is the Social Democrat ideology, which worked when there was a... Now, I'm going to make some pretty fundamental Marxist... very briefly, succinctly, I hope, going to make a fundamental criticism of social democracy. And I'm speaking as somebody who stood as a Labour parliamentary candidate 2 occasions, and I was the leader of a Labour Party in my area of 2/3 people. So I do see the need for reforms, of course. But social democrats are about challenging and critiquing existing society a little. Not much, a little. And let's have some reforms. And those reforms, when, I repeat, when the economy was growing, those reforms were wonderful. Look at me. I grew up under the National Health Service. I'm 108 years old. I'm not. I had free orange juice. I had free milk. I grew up in the welfare state. I had free education. While the economy was growing. The National Health Service. We can see the same in France after the Second World War. We can see the same, to a little extent, in the USA as well. I want to make a political point here. It wasn't the capitalist class being nice and kind and philanthropic. It was because there was full employment, the trade unions were strong, and it was, if we have a Marxist analysis, it's because of the balance of class forces. And so in those periods of time, during what the French called les 30 glorieuses, the 30 glorious years after the Second World War, when the economy was growing, wages, salaries improved, benefits, welfare. So traditional social democratic ideology, I'm not talking about François Hollande. I'm not talking about Tony Blair. I'm talking about Jeremy Corbyn, talking about Jean-Luc Mélenchon, talking about, in England, the Prime Minister after the Second World War, Clement Attlee. I'm talking about Scandinavia, the governments in Scandinavia and Finland. Challenge the inequalities, have reforms, and in schooling. And I've been teaching since the late 1960s. Yes, I am that old. I've been teaching since the late 1960s. Very late. So we engaged, we tried to do social justice pedagogy. We tried anti-racism, we tried anti-sexism, anti-homophobia. We tried to teach about social class inequalities. And the current movement, which I'm sure you're all very much aware of, critical pedagogy, and perhaps in one of the other sessions we can look at the difference between critical pedagogy and Marxist pedagogy. But it's within the existing capitalist system. And you know what? When there is a global crisis of capital, then the money is not there to sustain those reforms. So every single, I repeat that, every single crisis of capitalism, crisis of lower rate of profits, crisis of overaccumulation, every single crisis, workers get paid less. There are cuts. There are cuts in the welfare state. Every single crisis. 19th century, 1930s, 1970s, and 80s, 2000 and since 2008. And we come to the final one, and I say the final, because I end up on what I believe. We challenge and critique existing society and replace it. If I want to, do you know the phrase soft soap? Soft soap means be very gentle. If I want to be very gentle, I'd say we need a post-capitalist society. That's the soft way of saying it. But I think we need a collectively owned democratic Marxist society, of which there will be many variants, many variations. We cannot simply take a red print, blueprint or red print from the past. We have to, things have happened, we have to learn. We have to learn from the Stalinist dictatorship and the mistakes. Okay, so that's what is education for, and then I'm going to just be fairly quick about this, because I think you probably know about these quite a lot, quite probably more than I do. But you've all looked at Paulo Freire? Anybody? You've looked at the work of Paulo Freire, Pedagogy of the Oppressed, and etc., etc. And the concept of conscientization, and that this first thing, any curriculum which ignores racism and sexism, and note the next bit, the exploitation of workers and other forms of oppression, at the same time is supporting the status quo. Now this is interesting. This exploitation of workers. Because, I have a library, and we all have libraries. I have a library of books on education for equality, education for social justice. And so many times I pick up books from the States and England, and it talks about inequalities of race, inequalities of gender, inequalities related to differential abilities, nothing on social class. Because in the States, it rarely features, and in some books in England. I think the Yana Knowles book in England, which is one of the main books, I don't think it talks about inequalities of social class. Len and I have written a book, edited a book, and I edited 2 or 3 books with Mike Cole, all the 1980s, 90s. Equality in the primary school, equality in the secondary school. Len and I did one in 2009, equality in the primary school. And there, we look at race and gender and disability. We also look at class. In the States, they don't even talk about class. They talk about the books that are written about social class. They disguise the word. They have books on urban education. And similarly, very few people in the States call themselves Marxist educators. I went to a conference in the state, American Education Research Association, AERA, and I went there, and I bumped into, I won't mention the person, lovely person, and I bumped into this person, and this person said, "Hi Dave, I've read your latest book. Hey, I'm a criticalist too." No, I'm a Marxist, I'm a criticalist. So language, okay. So any curriculum which ignored, but Freire of course worked with the landless workers, and so he was concerned with the issues of social class, as well as race and gender. Yeah. Now Gramsci, I know that some of you are very much into Gramsci, also a lot was saying that you are. And the concept of hegemony, which is hugely important for critical education. This is the quote, "Pessimism of the intellect, optimism of the will." We know from Gramsci, actually, we know from, in 1920, perhaps I shouldn't mention people from the Soviet era, but Preobrazhensky and Bukharin, from that time onwards, 1920, to Althusser, Bolzingitis, Bernstein, Bourdieu, and all the current today's critical educators. We'll talk about the education as a key site, a key locus, a key place for cultural contestation. Now again, perhaps tomorrow or the day after we can have debate about this, but there is a question about how key. You see, I'm with Gramsci and Pericles Pavlidis. And in the States, never read a word of Marx. They've read people who have interpreted, other people who have interpreted Marx. Won't mention any names. And they do a good job, but. So there is a debate about how key teachers are. Oh, there's a nice quote from Pericles Pavlidis. Has anyone ever seen or read Pericles Pavlidis? Well, he's got an article. Hannah was very kindly enough to mention the journal that I run and founded, the Journal for Critical Education Policy Studies. I'll repeat that. It's free, online, scholarly, prestigious, and it's great. The Journal for Critical Education Policy Studies. I work a lot in Greece, and I work mainly with Kostas Skordoulis, but one of the best intellectuals and radical Marxist educators is Pericles Pavlidis. And this is what he writes, and it relates to Gramsci and Gramsci's concept of teachers and workers, people as organic intellectuals. So the quote: educators as teachers, cultural workers, media workers, journalists, lecturers, professors, cannot fight for a genuine transformation of society unless they are emotionally, ideologically and politically attached to the social force that mostly needs this transformation. And such a force within capitalism is only the class of wage labourers and workers. And when I use the word workers or class, of course class is gendered. Of course class is raced. Of course it is. But it is class nevertheless. And I think those who see the primary struggle in society, I count myself a Marxist feminist and a Marxist anti-racist. I've been attacked by fascists twice during my involvement with anti-fascist struggles, street struggles. But I think we have to be affiliated with, emotionally, ideologically and politically, with organisations with the working class. Okay, this is very basic. I think I'm going to end up on some fairly basic ones here. Anybody read Henry Giroux? Okay, I can see some nodding. Anybody read Peter McLaren? Anybody been spellbound by Peter McLaren? He's very good. He's very good. Giroux writes beautifully. And if you want to read short pieces, Giroux writes regular pieces in online American publications called Truth Out, all one word, Truth Out, Henry Giroux, Truth Out, and Counterpunch, and there's one more, can't remember the name. But if you just Google Henry Giroux, you'll get his latest. Henry Giroux ain't no Marxist, but he writes brilliant critique of neoliberal university, of neoliberal education. I remember reviewing his book in 1991 called Postmodern Education. And in it, he said, I am no longer a Marxist. I'm a post-Marxist. Not a neo-Marxist, post-Marxist. And he stayed as a post-Marxist. And so for me, his analysis, where he goes from his analysis is deficient. Is not enough. Although most recently, faced with Trump, I mean, I read his stuff regularly online. Most recently, he started saying, we must all work together to defeat. I mean, he started actually to talk a little about organisation and programme. So, even the great can transform themselves, be transformed by events. Okay. Anybody heard of Ira Shaw? Much more modest man. This is being streamed, isn't it? Yes, he's a modest man. And not with good reason. There's a classic insult about somebody. Oh, she is a very modest person. He is a very modest man, and with very good reason. But Ira Shaw is a modest man. He's done about 5 books, including, I think, one with Paulo Freire. And his books are very, very, very good. The others have written 53 books each. But Ira Shaw, worth looking at. And of course, I mean, Len and I have worked together for a number of years now. And do you know, any of you specialists in early years teaching? Teaching of like 0 to 8? Well, there is the Reggio Emilia in Italy, which is the famous one. It was organised by, if I can use the word, communists after the Second World War in Italy in reaction against fascism. Never postmodern writers was a game. You know, to invent new words that nobody will understand, to be clever. Then after about 4 or 5 years, McLaren worked with British Marxists, Glenn Mycoskie, Mike Cole, Paula Allman, and me, and he came back to Marxism. And his writing now is not just critical pedagogy, it's revolutionary critical pedagogy, which means with a Marxist meta-narrative. And so this is just one quote. So he extends critical education into revolutionary pedagogy. And he places the liberation from race, class and gender oppression as the key goal for education in the new millennium. Right, and see, he writes based on democratic socialist ideals. I've got about 4 slides left. About 5 slides left. The next 2 are pictures, and I think you are beyond them. So, but this graph. This one is the meritocratic. Let's give opportunities for the poor, for the workers, for women, disabled, African Americans, Latinos, Latinas. So let's give them a leg up. On the other hand, you have the critical transformation of the whole political system, so that they're not going into a society after school where some people earn 386 times as much as somebody else. And there's, again, the 2 different views of education. But on the green side, and we'll we'll talk about this, no doubt, tomorrow, day after. In terms of teacher education. Teacher education in Britain and the States is not about education, it's about delivery. It's about delivery. It's about technical skills training. Whereas we see students as citizens in the making. We see teachers as critical intellectuals, etc. Right. And this is my final slide, apart from some pictures. So this will be on my gravestone, but not this week, I hope. We should be public. And it has its dangers. I'm not ashamed to say that I have been moved on from 5 of my jobs, made redundant 3 times and actually encouraged to move on. Mr. Hill, if you want promotion, I think you're going to have to look elsewhere. That type of thing. And I'm proud. I walk proud. Being a public intellectual. Writing, speaking, in public. Organic, for the Gramsci, from Gramsci. Connected with, not just free-floating intellectual, but part of a movement, or part of different movements, or sub-movements. Which can, of course, be, it's not just trade union, economic-based movements. They can be gender-related, LGBT-related, but with a Marxist analysis. And then I've got democratic Marxist. That's the analysis. And I put that partly because the next word, transformative, can mean so many things. I was travelling to Australia once and I picked up an Indonesian newspaper and it said, "We believe in transformative education. We must transform our citizenry into good Muslims." So I think we have to specify what we mean by transformative. I mean, and for a lot of American liberal critical pedagogues, transformative means just changing your belief in yourself. You can do it! Which is not unimportant, but if you stop there, I mean, we're talking about society, not just individuals. Intellectuals, you must, most of you know the phrase from Gramsci, all men, he was writing before all people, all men are intellectuals. You know this quote, all men are intellectuals. What's the rest of the quote go like? All men are intellectuals. And then he goes on about teachers and educators are privileged to have the role of intellectuals. Everybody's an intellectual. Everybody analyses situations. But our job, how wonderful, our job, we are paid to think. We are paid to teach. So we have the social role, that's the key phrase, the social role of intellectuals. We talked about utopian. We talked about number 10, activist. I want to say a little bit about number 9. Has anybody ever seen Diana Ross and the Supremes?
Yeah.
I used to love Tamla Motown when I was a kid. Used to love it. And at the end of every performance, Diana Ross would go and say, "You know, I want to thank you all so much. I love you all." I'm not saying that. And a lot of the Latin American literature and the American literature on critical pedagogy talks about the importance of love. I'm not knocking that. I'm not knocking that at all. When I think back to the very first class of kids that I taught in Brixton, in London, in a very poor area, I felt a sort of love for them. You know, a compassion and empathy and emotion of really wanting the best for them. But I prefer to talk about kindness. So often, some intellectuals and some politicians, I'm kind. society of the future. I think we need that kindness. Is Rosa Luxemburg okay to talk about in Poland?
She's quite okay.
So, this is, again, the classic quote from Rosa Luxemburg. There's a choice between socialism and barbarism. And for increasing millions and hundreds of millions around the world, life is barbaric. That's my journal. Published 400 authors, including world famous ones and people who are publishing for the first time. If you want to write for this, it'd be a pleasure. I assume you're all coming to this next conference in Athens. The fees, €30 for students, registration. It is deliberately cheap. Len and I go to conferences, separate conferences, sometimes the same conference. But this is €30, deliberately so. And we expect you all there. In fact, we'll probably have a special reception for you all if you come. Serious, I'm not joking. Serious. Special reception for the European Doctorate in Teacher Education students. Probably have you up on the stage with everyone clapping. Put in your papers.
That's an invitation.
Me and Kostas Kordoulis and George Grolios, we are the people running this conference. Together with, of course, the administrative help and the people who do a lot of work. Okay, so come to this. Well, some of you looked excited. You've got to come, you've got to come. These journals support it, list of journals. Has anybody heard of the second one, Critical Education? It's published in Canada. Who's heard of it? Nobody? It's run by somebody called Wayne Ross. Wayne Ross and 3 colleagues. It's online. We all, we believe, as Marxists, we believe in, to repeat from the very beginning, free education, free knowledge. Okay. Oh, and then the final thing. So this is demonstrations. Fantastic. Young people demonstrating, not for their own individual futures, but demonstrating. At Sussex University, I live near there, so it's very handy for me to go along and join demonstrations. So they're having demonstrations, occupations against privatising, the catering, the portering. And then the top one is a strike, I think 150,000 students. 150,000 students. This was like 5-6 years ago. And my very final slide is by Bertolt Brecht. Basically, it says this: if we struggle, we can fail. If we don't, we've already failed. Thank you. Thomas, did you go like that?
Yeah.
Good. I thought you did. Yeah. Okay, so that's my presentation finished. Lothar is chairing this.
Yes, so anybody questions, comments, please